Talking about is targets in this eastern part of Syria and the southeastern part of Syria. So a better map to show that probably is this one right here. And what you're looking at is all the ISIS concentrations right in this area. And so the target area that we're really dealing with is this part right in this part of the Syrian desert. This is where those 75 plus targets were struck using munitions that were carried in by the likes of the A-10, which is basically a tank killer, and in many ways an aircraft built around a Gatling gun, which is a type of machine gun that goes as far back as the Civil War. B-52, the famous bomber workhorse right here. This is something that can, a vehicle that can carry a whole bunch of bombs, about 31,000 kilograms, 75,000 or 70,000 pounds of bombs of various types, including the Joint Direct Attack munition, and of course the F-15, which is a fighter jet that has a 20 millimeter gun, as well as carrying up to 26 bombs, depending on how it's configured. So that's the kind of weapon systems that were used in this, and these can be highly, highly effective against targets like ISIS.
And Cedric, there's obvious concern about any sort of power vacuum. What do we know about these different rebel groups and their links to terror groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda?
Yeah, so this is, quite a big deal on this particular day. So let's take a look first at the map right here. We've got the Kurdish forces up here in the north and the northeast. We've got Syrian rebels that now control all of this. You've got Turkish-backed forces that are here. And then, of course, the Islamic State that we talked about in this particular scenario where we had the U.S. attack on them. But the main rebel group, the umbrella group, is Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS for short. It's a former Al-Qaeda affiliate, and many of its elements are actually based on Al-Qaeda or ISIS. The leader is a man named Abu Muhammad al-Julani. He's 42 years old, comes originally from Syria. His parents came from Syria. He was born in Saudi Arabia, but he's got a $10 million bounty on his head because of terrorist activity that he conducted in Iraq. He was actually imprisoned by U.S. forces in Iraq. And of course, HTS is designated a terror group, not only by the U.S., the UN, Turkey, other countries have designated this group as a terror group, but it really depends on what they do next, whether or not these designations continue.
And we heard from the leader of that main rebel group in Syria, HTS, as you mentioned, for the first time this morning since all this happened. I want to listen to it.
This victory, my brothers, is a victory for the entire Islamic nation. This new triumph, my brothers, marks a new chapter in the history of the region, a history fraught with dangers. Leaving Syria as a playground for Iranian ambitions, spreading sectarianism, stirring corruption, it became the world's leading source of Captagon. But today, Syria is being purified by the grace of God Almighty and through the efforts of the Iraq Mujahideen.
And we heard him describe Syria there during the Assad regime as a, quote, playground for Iranian ambition. Walk us through what he might have meant by that.
So this is really quite an interesting way of describing things, Jessica, but Iran had a lot of presence in all of these areas. They had main headquarters for their efforts in Damascus. They had bases throughout the country in many of these areas. They were funneling weapons right here into Lebanon. And of course, those weapons were used by Hezbollah to attack Israel, which is right down over here. Basically, Syria could be looked at as a staging area for Iran to conduct operations against targets of various types, including American targets in Iraq, American targets potentially in Turkey, targets in Jordan, and of course Israel and Lebanon. So with the elimination of Syria as a jumping off point for the Iranians, that makes a huge difference, and it really constrains Iran's power. So what al-Julani was talking about here was he doesn't want Syria to be used as a base for Iranian activity because he sees that as detrimental to Syria as well as to the interests of any future Syrian government that he might lead.
And another thing that we keep hearing about now that the Assad regime has officially fallen is this concern around Assad's weapons arsenal and potentially chemical weapons falling into the wrong hands. And we have some video of the aftermath of one of those alleged chemical attacks in 2016 showing the horrific scene of the victims, including children crying. You see people there covering their mouths with towels. truly awful. What can you tell us about that? What do we know about where this potential arsenal could be stored?
So there are about 6 storage sites throughout throughout Syria that would come into question. There's several around the Homs area. There's some over here in the western side. There are some also near Aleppo, at least they were before the rebels took this area over. So 6 sites that are basically capable of not only holding weapons like VX, sarin, mustard gas. Those were the kinds of chemical weapons that you saw being used against Syrian civilians throughout these areas, but particularly in places like Homs and Hama, where the resistance to the Assad regime was so strong at the start of the Syrian civil war. So all of these areas potentially still hold chemical weapons that could be weaponized, that could be used for an attack on other nations, other Syrians, and that's the kind of thing that really needs to be prevented, and there has to be some kind of an international look at that as we get into the next phase of Syria.
All right, Colonel Cedric Layton walking us through so much of this. Thank you very much. We appreciate it.